everybody. Thank you for attending today. This is the next session of ERA 25 Unpacked. I know a lot of you do know me, but if you have not met me before, my name is Victoria Brown. And what we're doing is a series of events around the Employment Rights Act of 25. Claire and I are cutting this down into 20 to 25-minute sessions because we appreciate how many changes there are over the next 2 years, and it can be quite overwhelming. So I hope you find these sessions useful. We will share afterwards, so please do feel free to share to other colleagues that you think may find this useful. So today I'm going to talk about family leave and the Fair Work Agency. In terms of agenda, I'm going to cover off paternity leave today, the changes there, the changes to unpaid parental leave. I'm going to talk to you about how it's become more flexible around shared parental leave and taking paternity leave. The introduction of the bereaved partners paternity leave. The Fair Work Agency, there's a lot of noise and talk about this. Let's just start to look at what this is and what it means to you. And then also, one that snuck in that quite a few people missed was the changes around employee annual leave and holiday pay records and the responsibility that employers now have in this area. Let's start with paternity leave. So, as many of you will recall, before the 6th of April, there was a request you had to provide 26 weeks to be eligible for paternity leave. This has now changed. So the minimum service level rule is now day one right for paternity leave. So you'll see a lot of day one rights here. Just to note, sorry as well, if anybody does have any questions, I noticed somebody's just raised their hand, please do put them in the chat box. We've only got sort of 25 minutes, so I will do my best to answer any questions for you. If I don't have the opportunity to get to them, I promise you that I will respond to any questions that you have on this session. There is the change here as well for the day one right to paternity leave is that there is a temporary shorter notice period. So as it stood at the moment, we did have 15 weeks until to be able to provide notice to your employer that you would like to take paternity leave. What the government have done is change this. So only for a short temporary period of time. So the reason for that is to allow for this transition and allow for people that were newer that sort of started within the organisation to benefit from this day one right. So up until the 25th of July, you will be able to, employees can provide 28 days notice of their intention to take paternity leave. This then will go back to what we're used to, which is the 15-week. What to bear in mind there, though, is that the day one right takes precedence here. So if you do have an employee, for example, that starts in your organisation in June and they let you know that they're expecting a baby in July, they can't provide you with that 15-week notice. So you need to be fair and reasonable and allow them to take that leave. Now, what I'm talking to you about here is the paternity leave, not the pay. So the pay still remains the same. There still is that requirement for the 26-week qualifying period for paternity pay. So moving now on to the unpaid parental leave. So unpaid parental leave, before the 6th of April, parents must have 1 year of service to qualify. Now the minimum service level rules are a day one right to take that unpaid parental leave. So just to give you a recap of what I'm talking about here in terms of parental leave, this is where every employee has the opportunity for to have up to 18 weeks in total for each eligible child. They can take that in 1 week blocks. They need to provide you with 21 days notice. And unless your policy says otherwise, they are prohibited to only take 4 weeks per child per year. Now, just to mention, this is different if their child is disabled. They are allowed to take 1 day instances. And you would record that to obviously add up to that 18 weeks in total for that eligible child. But please don't confuse this. And I do find that quite a lot of managers can confuse this with time off for dependents. So time off for dependents is when somebody needs to take that emergency leave. So say, for example, if you've got children, you'll be familiar with that phone call from nursery or from school to say that your child is poorly and you have to obviously go and pick them up because you haven't got that childcare in place. This can be tricky, and I do appreciate that it can be difficult to be able to manage and navigate through this, particularly if there is high frequency. So my advice would always be to speak to a professional if you have an employee that is frequently off for time off with dependents, so they clearly haven't got the sufficient childcare in place. Then have a chat with your HR manager, HR consultant, or your solicitor just to get some further guidance of how to navigate through that situation. Okay, so the next one is taking paternity leave and shared parental leave. And I know there's quite a few HR professionals on this call today. So if you're like me, when shared parental leave came into play, I think we all, are fair to say, scratched our head, took a lot of time understanding it and then putting the policies together and then expecting, having spoke to a lot of employers and managers at the time, we were expecting there to be an influx in shared parental leave requests. And there wasn't. And I think part of that is because it is an incredibly complicated process. So I think in the government are looking at that and they are trying to make this more flexible, more easy, and adjusting a lot of the law to manage the way in which we work now, you know, and the way families need that support and flexibility to be able to continue to work. So with this, what they've done, and the way it used to be before, is it was kind of use it first for paternity leave or lose it. So if a father or partner didn't take that leave at the beginning, then they effectively lost it. What's changed here is this just that restriction has been removed. So it's just giving people more flexibility. And as we know, things change when you have children. Childcare flexibility needs to be in place there. So this gives people the ability now, if they've applied for shared parental leave and then they want to take the paid paternity leave a little bit later, they can do that. Just one thing I would mention here is just to remember that the statutory paternity leave still must be completed within the 52 weeks of the child's date of birth or adoption placement. Just moving to the next slide. So key considerations for what I've just talked to you about. Update and amend current policies. If you are a retained HR client, then you will have received those updates to your policies and procedures already. If you don't have One HR, for example, then I would urge you to make sure that you have communicated these changes to your people. Also check that contracts are compliant. I am very much, as some of you will know, a great believer in less is more. And I hate it when I see contracts of employment that have got refer to policies and information in there because it just makes it incredibly complicated in situations like this, because when they're changing the policy, you've got to then change the contract of employment. So hopefully your contracts of employment just refer to the policy and you can make the change there. But if they don't, then have a look at that. That needs to be changed, and you know, potentially you need to speak to a professional to support you with that change. And train your teams. I can see today that we've got some managers on this call, which is fantastic. Really good that you are obviously going to be informed of these changes to the law, so you know how to handle this if an employee then asks you for this particular type of leave. Also, just making sure that your systems can process this change and payroll understand the changes in place. And it's just that ability to consider workforce planning as well. That with there being that day one right to this now, it opens up more of the workforce being able to apply for this leave. But what I have found, and I do know from quite a few of you that are on this session today, you're already really fair and reasonable. So a lot of these changes you actually already do. You know, if somebody starts with your business and they ask, they're having a baby and they ask for that paternity leave, you've not waited for them to have that 26-week notice. So it may not really impact you as much as you may have thought. So the next area which is interesting is the introduction that the government have put in play on the 6th of April for bereaved partners' paternity leave. And I really hope that none of you have to tackle this, because obviously this is horrendous for any employee to deal with. But what it does do is provide eligible fathers and partners with up to 52 weeks unpaid leave if the mother or primary adopter sadly dies. It's again been introduced as a day one right. There is a theme to the changes in the Employment Rights Act, with day one rights being put into play. And this gives people the ability to take leave from the day after the death of the mother or primary adopter. And it must be taken within the first 52 weeks of the child's birth or adoption placement. So just in terms of eligibility and notice for this, so for eligibility, the employee must be the child's father or the spouse, civil partner or partner of the mother or adopter, and they must have primary responsibility for the child's upbringing. Notice if the leave starts within the first 8 weeks, and you need to consider this from the sensitivity. Obviously, if this has happened to somebody, it's so traumatic, the last thing they're going to be thinking about is contacting their employer. So where there's some flexibility here is the notice can be provided informally and given any time before the employee's first day of absence. After that 8 weeks, there is an expectation then for the employee to provide 1 week written notice to the employer. And this is just, to help for you to be able to resource plan. Employees don't miss out on their family leave entitlement. So what I've just talked about then in terms of family leave entitlement, they won't miss out on those paid options. This is an unpaid option, but the only thing with the family leave entitlements is they need to take that in 1 week blocks. So again, we need to update policies and procedures. This needs to be included. If you're not on a retained service, then you need to look at this and make sure that you have updated these changes so that employees are aware of this entitlement. Again, I go back to sort of reviewing employment contracts so that there's nothing there that contradicts this change. And train your managers, make sure that your managers and your HR teams are aware of this and how to handle these sensitive requests. So as we've talked about several times in other sessions before, consider, have you got an EAP system? Have you got a mental health first aider, for example? This is really helpful in very difficult situations like this. It's being supportive as an employer, and the law has changed to allow for that now, but also ensuring that you signpost that person to additional support as well that they may need during that really traumatic time. You need to check your HR system as well. It's not going to be a leave entitlement that you've currently got, so that needs to be in place and payroll need to be aware of it should obviously you need to utilise this. And it's about communicating this well to staff as well, so they are informed and they are aware, because when something like horrendous like this happens, they're probably not thinking straight. So it's explaining to them their rights and how they can be supported. Just to note on this as well, you can also access 10 kit days. So those keeping in touch days, so they can be paid. So if you have somebody off for 52 weeks, similar to the way we handle maternity leave, it's great to utilise those 10 kit days because it's a great way to be able to reintegrate that person back into the workplace, particularly when they've suffered such a trauma as that. And they do have protected redundancy rights as well. So something just for you to consider. And obviously, if you are having to restructure or make redundancies, it is something that you need to speak to your HR team with, and they will sort of flag the protection that they have in those areas. Okay, so moving on. Um, the next area that I want to talk to you about is the Fair Work Agency. So this was introduced on the 7th of April, and I think everybody has sort of looked at this and thought, well, who are they? What does this mean to me? And this is really significant and something that I wanted to put in this session today. I want you to be aware of it, um, and be aware of what they're going to be capable of doing, particularly in 2027. So it's a real opportunity for you to get your ducks in a row and be prepared for this significant change. So who are they? What it is it's actually bringing together enforcement bodies that already exist, but it's bringing them together, putting the powers together, the staff and the budgets. And I was looking yesterday, and over £60 million has been invested by the government in the Fair Work Agency. So they've been formed. They're obviously adding to this resource now. And what it's bringing together is the National Minimum Wage Enforcement Team, the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate, and the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority. Just move to the next slide, please, Maisie. And what are they going to do? Well, the idea behind it is to promote fair and consistent workplace practices. So what does that look like? Well, they're going to be looking at things like what they already look at, which is pay, working conditions, and workers' rights. And they're going to have enforcement officers and a broad inspection powers. So what they're going to be able to do is very similar to what we have now. And for some of you, you will be familiar with this from a health and safety perspective, where you can get an unexpected visit from HSE. And that's going to be the same here with the Fair Work Agency. They don't need to make an appointment. They're potentially just going to rock up to your premises, and they're going to demand to see certain things. So they're going to demand to see, for example, your evidence of holiday pay, the sort of any workplace practices, and you're going to have to be able to comply and be ready for that. So personally, I feel like this is going to have significant exposure on the SME market, because obviously we've not necessarily got these sophisticated practices in place, and we haven't got the same resource. So we're going to really be impacted on these demands and being able to provide this information. Next slide, please, Nate. So one of the things I wanted to point out to you was sort of their enforcement powers. So they're going to be able to issue notices for underpayment of areas like national minimum wage, statutory sick pay, and holiday pay. But also, they're going to be able to issue financial penalties. So not only are you going to have to back pay and make those payments if you've been wrong in an error and underpaid someone, they also can penalise you for up to 200% of the underpayment, and it's capped at £20,000 per worker, and that's payable directly to the Secretary of State. So, and they can recover enforcement costs. So if, for example, a judge has awarded an employee a tribunal award and it hasn't been paid, then they have those powers to be able to enforce that, and request and demand that is paid. So linked to this is the other change. So the other change that snuck in that a lot of people missed was on the 6th of April, but it is linked to the Fair Work Agency because they will have the enforcement powers here, that an employer is required to keep detailed employee annual leave and holiday pay records for a minimum of 6 years. Now, the good news is this is not retrospective. So we're only in May, you need to make sure that from the 6th of April, you have found a way to record this information correctly. And most importantly, it is correct as well, and there are no errors in the way in which you calculate holiday leave pro rata amount, particularly for, I think, people that have hospitality, for example, and where you're working with sort of 0-hour contracts, it's making sure that you're really clear on what those entitlements look like. So there is a requirement for you to automatically track and store employees' annual leave balances and usage. So, for example, looking at, they'll be under scrutiny of what your policies look like here. So if somebody hasn't taken all their leave, what can they carry over? What do they lose? Is that recorded correctly? If somebody leaves, is that being prorated correctly? If they start, is that pro rata amount correct? And I appreciate this can be quite complicated, so it may be an opportunity for you to run an audit and seek some professional advice in these areas if you're unsure. Need to provide the audit trails and reports, and this will fall under the remit of the Fair Work Agency. And penalties may include unlimited fines. So this is a really key area, and it's something that I was talking to one of our employment law solicitors about this week because we were quite shocked by the fines. So just in terms of, I just jotted down for you to be aware of, there is 2 tiers to this. So it's not just about you making an underpayment. You can actually, it's considered a criminal offence in tier 1 if you haven't got the records in the first place, and the fine is unlimited. So it's not about just, well, it doesn't matter because I pay everyone correctly. If you can't provide those 6 years of evidence, then you can still face a criminal offence and a fine. And then obviously the tier 2 is the civil fine, and we've talked about that before. So that is the ability for the Fair Work Agency to be able to enforce you to pay back any underpayment going right back 6 years. And also what we talked about in terms of the cap of 20,000 for each employee, but there being that civil penalty of up to 200% if you have made a mistake. So what you need to do is you just need to make sure that you've got your ducks in a row in this area in particular. Make sure you've got those records, not just got the records, but are you managing annual leave and entitlement correctly as well? And as I say, it may be that you just need to touch base with a professional in this regard just to ensure that everything is correct. If it's not correct, then remedy it now rather than potentially getting that 200% fine from the Fair Work Agency. Let's avoid those fines. And the other thing is where you're recording this. So I do know, having been sort of in HR for 20 years now, there are still quite a lot of companies that rely on things like a wall planner. That's not going to be helpful anymore. Not just the fact that it's not going to be able to demonstrate how you have calculated things, but also where you're going to store it. So if you've still got paper trails for leave and absence, then you've got to consider how you are going to be complying with obviously GDPR rules as well. And putting it in a filing cabinet somewhere for 6 years is probably not good enough. Not to mention business continuity as well, because if something happens to your property, you've lost that information, and I'm not sure Fair Worker Agency are going to take that as an excuse. So my advice, I love HR tech, as you know, would be to ensure that you have software in place. And I know quite a lot of you on this session today have HR software in place, various types of software, but then I know some of you also have OneHR. We do offer OneHR, so if there is anybody that is interested in looking at how you can record things digitally, do drop me a message afterwards and we can set up that demo for you. But regardless, my advice would be just make sure that you have those records in place. It doesn't have to be digital. It's not a requirement from the government that it's digital, but that would be best practice. And it's really cheap to get HR software now. And when you look at the sort of fines there, it would make commercial sense for you to get that correct now. Also, bearing in mind, if you do have HR software, the retention periods to that. Now, I know, say, for example, on OneHR, there is an admin section which will allow you to pick the retention period before that information is expunged. So if you're not using that software and using something different, just check in with the software provider that that information is recorded and stored for 6 years for you. Okay, so I'm just going to check here if we've got any questions? No, no questions on this. If you do have any questions, then please do let me know. I'm more than happy to help and give you any guidance that you may need. The next session that we're doing is on unfair dismissal. So that is a session certainly not to be missed. As you will be aware, there are some significant changes coming into play from the beginning of January. You need to actually start to consider that now because a lot of your employees now that have started will impact with that rule now. So join our session. You can register here, but we will send you the link afterwards as well. And if you found this useful, we do have the peopleHUB community. I know there are many of you on this call today that are part of that, which is fantastic to see. But you are very welcome to join our peopleHUB community. Idea is things like this, really, that we come together as HR professionals, as managers, anybody that has some responsibility of people and how we can support one another, particularly whilst we navigate through some quite difficult changes in legislation. So thank you very much for today. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch and share the slides for you as well. Thank you.